It started with a silence so heavy, it could shatter glass. Not the kind of silence that fills a room after bad news. This was colder, heavier, deliberate. It was the silence before a royal storm. Because inside Buckingham Palace, something unthinkable was happening. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A father, a king, was about to erase his own son's royal bloodline. The words were chillingly simple, yet catastrophic. You are no more a royal. Just 6 words. But those 6 words would tear open wounds that had been festering since the moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from the royal balcony and into Hollywood lights. But how did it get this far? How did the once beloved spare, Diana's little boy, the cheeky prince the world adored, become the man stripped of every ounce of royal identity by his own father? And why now? Why, after years of silence and tension, did King Charles suddenly decide, enough is enough? That's what we're about to uncover. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about power, legacy, and something far darker that had been hiding in plain sight. The British monarchy has weathered countless scandals, divorces, affairs, leaked letters, even tapes that shook the throne. But this time, this wasn't about protecting image. This was personal. And it all began on a foggy Thursday morning when the palace issued a single line of statement to the press. His Majesty the King has decided to permanently revoke all royal privileges and status from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, effective immediately. No explanation, no ceremony, no farewell speech, just a verdict. Within seconds, the world erupted. Social media exploded with disbelief. Was this real? Had the king truly exiled his own son? Was this a final punishment? Or the ultimate act of mercy? Because deep down, behind those golden palace doors, this wasn't just a royal announcement. It was the end of a father's patience and the beginning of a reckoning years in the making. The moment the letter was delivered to Montecito, the California mansion went from laughter to panic. Meghan was reportedly hosting a small meeting with her team when an aide entered, pale as chalk, holding a thick envelope embossed with the royal crest. At first, she smiled. "It's probably about reconciliation," she allegedly said. But when she opened it, that smile vanished. The words were unmistakable, direct, brutal, final. And according to insiders, Harry, who had been outside tending to their garden, walked in, saw her face, and dropped his phone. He didn't need to ask what it said, because he already knew this day was coming. The signs had been there for months. King Charles had been withdrawing, both emotionally and politically. Royal aides described an icy distance in communication, short messages through intermediaries, and a sense of frustration that grew by the day. Behind closed doors, senior members of the family had reached their limit. The endless Netflix interviews, the late-night monologues about royal cruelty, the book Spare that painted the palace as a prison. It wasn't just public embarrassment, it was betrayal dressed as confession. And in the quiet corners of Windsor, whispers began. Can the monarchy survive this much exposure? What will the people think if the king keeps forgiving? But it wasn't until one document, one private dossier, landed on the king's desk that everything changed. It contained information that, according to palace insiders, linked Meghan to unauthorized use of royal trademarks and potential exploitation of her former title for commercial gain. For Charles, that was it. To him, the monarchy wasn't just a family, it was a contract with the public. And when that contract was broken, someone had to pay. He called an emergency meeting. William, Princess Anne, a handful of trusted advisors. And that was when he said it. It's time to end the illusion. But ending the illusion meant rewriting history, stripping his own son of everything his crown represented. And as he signed that decree, those close to him swear they saw a single tear fall. Not for the monarchy. For the boy Diana once cradled, the son who'd called him Pa, with innocent devotion. Now that boy was gone, replaced by a man the world barely recognized. But what hurt the king most wasn't the interviews or the accusations. It was the silence. Harry hadn't called. Not once. Not when Charles was hospitalized. Not when he ascended the throne. Not when his mother's anniversary came. And yet, when the cameras rolled, Harry had all the words in the world. What would you do if your own child turned your life into a documentary for strangers to dissect? Would you forgive them? or protect what generations before you built. The king had made his choice. But here's the twist. This final verdict wasn't just his. It was reportedly encouraged by both Prince William and Princess Anne, who had grown tired of the damage. William, the heir, saw the chaos as a direct threat to the institution he would soon inherit. And the ever-pragmatic royal allegedly told her brother, "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be royal anymore." But Harry wanted both. He wanted the crown's respect and the freedom of Hollywood. And that contradiction was the curse that followed him everywhere. Inside Montecito, Meghan tried to hold it together. Cameras were reportedly removed from certain rooms. The staff instructed to say nothing. But her fury was volcanic. "How dare he?" she was heard saying. "They can't do this to us." But the truth was, they could. And they did. And in that moment, something inside Harry cracked. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was lost. Because what do you do when the identity you've carried since birth, the title that shaped your existence, is gone in a heartbeat? He had once said, "I'm not trapped. My brother is." But that night, staring at that letter, it was clear who the prisoner really was. A prisoner of his choices. A prisoner of his love. A prisoner of the image he helped create. And that's when he realized something devastating. This wasn't just exile. It was extinction. But the story doesn't end here. Because what no one expected was the hidden war brewing behind this royal decision. Behind the official language and the royal decree, there was another motive, one that had been whispered through palace corridors for months. Something involving a secret recording, a leaked file, and a betrayal that hit the king harder than any scandal before. The media didn't have it yet. The world didn't see it coming. But within 72 hours of the royal verdict, that secret would surface and turn the monarchy upside down once again. As dawn broke over London, cameras surrounded Buckingham Palace. The press begged for a statement, while in California, paparazzi swarmed the Sussex's gates. And for the first time in years, the royal family said nothing. No denials, no clarifications, just silence. And yet, that silence spoke volumes. The last time the palace went this quiet was the night Diana's accident was announced. It felt eerie, symbolic, final. Every royal watcher could sense it. This wasn't a disciplinary move. This was the beginning of a purge. The monarchy was cleansing itself of its modern curse, exposure. Because Harry and Meghan had done what no tabloid or scandal ever could. They made the crown look human. Too human. They revealed cracks in the marble. And Charles, a man who had waited 70 years for his throne, could not afford a fracture now. But as one chapter of the monarchy closed, another was about to explode into public view. Because what Harry didn't know was that William had been involved behind the scenes. He had seen the dossier. He had read the financial notes. And he had quietly urged the king to act. It wasn't out of spite. It was out of fear. Fear that the monarchy was slipping beyond control. And yet, William never expected his father to go this far. That's what makes this moment even more tragic. The heir helped build the trap that ended his brother's royal life. So, was this justice or a betrayal of blood? That's the question that still divides the nation. Because while the public debates, the truth remains locked away inside the palace walls. Where portraits of past monarchs stare down at a king who had to destroy his own son to save the throne. But what if that wasn't the end? What if the royal verdict was just the first act in a much larger story, one involving secret recordings, royal spies, and a plan years in the making? Because according to one senior royal aide, King Charles's decision wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He knew something big was coming, something that would shake the monarchy if Harry stayed within it. And when that truth comes out, we'll understand why the king looked so broken signing that decree. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The air inside Buckingham Palace that morning was heavier than the London fog outside. The marble corridors, usually echoing with the soft rhythm of footsteps and whispered protocol, felt unnaturally still. Even the guards shifted uneasily. Something was coming, and everyone could feel it. Behind the gilded doors of the king's private study, a crisis meeting had been called, unplanned, unscheduled, and completely off record. The last time something like this happened, it was the day Diana's passing shattered the world. But today, this wasn't about grief. It was about reckoning. The king sat at the head of the long oak table, hands clasped, face pale but resolute. His crown may have rested in another room, but that morning, his authority filled every inch of that chamber. "Enough," he said quietly. Just one word, yet it cut through the silence like a sword through silk. Around him sat only three others: Prince William, Princess, and the king's closest private secretary. No press, no aides, no distractions, because what was about to be decided would change the royal family forever. William leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. He had aged in the past few years, not from time, but from tension. The endless headlines about Harry, the public humiliation of the monarchy, the strain on his father's health, it had all taken its toll. "Father," William began cautiously, "we've tried silence, we've tried restraint, and we've tried forgiveness. But look where that's brought us." The king's gaze lifted, steady but weary. "Do you think I don't know that, William?" And spoke next. Her tone was sharper, pragmatic as ever. "The institution cannot survive if its own members exploit it for profit. We've been too lenient. The world is laughing." The king turned to her slowly. "And what would you have me do, Anne? Exile my own son?" She didn't flinch. "You already did. He just hasn't accepted it yet." That was the moment the private secretary slid a folder across the polished wood. A thick dossier, sealed and confidential, its contents known only to a handful of people in the entire country. The king hesitated before touching it, as if afraid of what waited inside. "Is this verified?" he asked. The secretary nodded. "Every line, sir." He opened it, and within seconds, the color drained from his face. Inside were records, emails, correspondences, financial transactions, all pointing toward one chilling truth. Meghan Markle, still listed under her royal title in certain corporate documents, was allegedly using the branding of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in connection with private ventures, licensing deals, PR partnerships, international agreements, and worse. An unapproved media project said to be in production, portraying royal life through fictionalized truth. It wasn't just bad optics. It was weaponizing the monarchy itself. William clenched his fists. "We can't keep pretending this is harmless. Every day, our family name is turned into a commodity. The crown isn't a brand, it's a legacy." Charles stared at the papers as if they were a betrayal written in blood. All his life, he had fought for legitimacy, for duty, for the monarchy to stand above spectacle. And now, it had been reduced to content. He rubbed his temple, the weight of history pressing on his chest. This is beyond disappointment. And broke the silence. It's desecration. William spoke again, his voice low but firm. "If we don't act, Father, history will remember us as the generation that let the monarchy become an influencer's playground." The words hit hard. Too hard. Because deep down, Charles knew William was right. He looked toward the tall window overlooking the palace garden, the same garden where his sons once played as children, Harry laughing, chasing his brother across the grass, Diana watching from the steps. Those memories, once comforting, now felt like ghosts taunting him. He closed the dossier gently, as if closing a coffin. "Prepare the order," he said. "Strip them of everything, titles, privileges, and protection. They are no longer representatives of this family." The private secretary froze. "Your Majesty, are you certain? This is irreversible." Charles's eyes hardened. So was their betrayal. The decision was made, not with rage, but with sorrow. And that made it even more devastating. Because sometimes, the cruelest decisions are made not from anger, but from love that's already been buried. William exhaled heavily, looking down. There was no satisfaction in his face, no triumph. Only grief. And remained stoic, though her eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of empathy for her brother. "History will understand," she said softly. Charles didn't answer. He simply stared at the portrait of his mother hanging above the fireplace. Queen Elizabeth II, dignified and composed, her eyes painted with a timeless calm. He whispered under his breath, "Forgive me, Mother." Then he stood, signaling the end of the meeting. The decision would be executed within hours. And as the royals dispersed quietly, one question lingered in the air. Would this decision save the monarchy or destroy what was left of their family? But outside that room, word had already begun to spread. Palace aides, hearing murmurs of revocation and royal decree, began whispering in hallways. The tension was contagious. Every corner of Buckingham felt electric with anticipation and dread. One senior staffer confided later that you could hear the fear that day. No one dared to speak above a whisper. It was as if the ghosts of past monarchs were watching. And as the king walked back to his private quarters, he passed through the corridor of portraits, generations of rulers staring down at him. Every one of them had faced rebellion, war, or scandal, but none had ever had to publicly denounce their own child. He paused before Diana's portrait. It wasn't official palace decor. Just a small framed photograph kept near the window, a personal keepsake he never let the public see. He looked at it for a long time. Then he murmured, "I hope you'd understand." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle was already making plans for a new business venture, a global lifestyle brand rumored to rival Goop, complete with luxury partnerships. To her, it was a symbol of independence. To the crown, it was a provocation. The irony? She had no idea what was about to hit her. Because the royal decree was already being drafted, an official legal document that would revoke their titles, strip their privileges, and remove any remaining ties to royal authority. The process was meticulous. Every phrase had to be legally watertight. Every word weighed for historical accuracy. It was William who insisted the wording be direct, and who ensured there was no loophole, and Charles who added the final line himself, one that would send shockwaves across the world. From this day forward, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex shall no longer enjoy the rights, status, or recognition of royal members of the United Kingdom. It was the end of an era, and the beginning of a new war. Later that evening, when the king retired to his private chamber, he reportedly sat alone by the fireplace for hours, staring into the flames. A servant who brought him tea said he looked broken but firm, like a man who'd burned down his own house to stop the fire from spreading. Outside, the clock struck midnight, and as the great bell of Buckingham tolled 12 times, a new day began, a day that would see the monarchy draw its most unforgiving line yet. Meanwhile, the palace communications team prepared a statement for release at dawn. They debated tone. Should it sound sorrowful or authoritative? Compassionate or decisive? Charles overruled them. "Let it sound final," he said. "No sentiment, just fact." And with that, history was set in motion. By morning, the world would wake to headlines no one believed possible. King Charles strips Harry and Meghan of royal status. But behind those headlines, there was one truth the press didn't know. This decision hadn't just been about betrayal. It had been triggered by something deeper, something that reached beyond politics, beyond family, into the very survival of the monarchy itself. Because a leak was coming. A scandal so severe that if Harry still held royal status when it broke, it could have toppled the entire crown. And only one person inside the palace knew about it. A whistleblower, a name that had been quietly erased from royal history years ago. But they were back, and this time, they were about to expose everything. What they knew would tear the royal illusion apart, and force King Charles to make the most devastating choice a father could ever make. Because the real story hadn't even begun yet, and what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It arrived on a Friday. The California sun was shining, the air smelled of lavender and expensive ocean breeze, and the Montecito mansion stood like a fortress of serenity, beautiful, quiet, unaware that history was about to knock on its glass doors. A black Range Rover pulled up at precisely 9:47 a.m. Two men stepped out, dressed not like couriers, but like diplomats. No words, no smiles, no cameras. Just silence and purpose. One carried a cream-colored envelope, heavy with wax and history. The other kept glancing at his watch. Inside the mansion, Meghan Markle was in her home office. Fresh coffee, laptop open, her assistant scrolling through emails. She was preparing for a virtual meeting, a potential brand partner for her lifestyle venture. The morning was ordinary, peaceful, almost too peaceful, until her head of staff appeared at the door, hesitant. "There are two gentlemen outside," she said softly. "From the palace." Meghan's brow lifted. "From Buckingham Palace?" "Yes." They said it's urgent. At first, she smiled, the kind of smile one wears when they believe they're in control. "Tell them to wait by the fountain," she said, adjusting her blazer. But when the envelope was brought in, she noticed the seal, the unmistakable royal crest, the king's personal insignia. Her smile faltered. For a moment, No one moved. Even the assistant's hand froze mid-scroll. Megan's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the letter. The paper was thick, real parchment, the kind reserved for royal decrees and state matters. She laughed nervously. Probably some ceremonial nonsense, she said, though her voice had lost its usual confidence. The first crack appeared as she broke the wax seal. Inside, the letter was short, only a few sentences, but it carried the weight of centuries. Her eyes darted across the lines, then stopped, then widened. The color drained from her face. She read it again, slower this time, as if the words might change. But they didn't. By the order of His Majesty the King, and with the full consent of the Royal Council, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex shall henceforth cease to hold or exercise any royal title, privilege, or authority, effective immediately. No signature flourish, no personal note, just cold, final legality. The King's seal stamped beneath. And beneath that, Prince William's countersignature. Meghan's hand trembled. She whispered, "No, this isn't real." But it was. Her assistant tried to speak, but Meghan raised her hand, eyes fixed on the letter. "Get Harry," she said quietly. Outside, the sun seemed to dim. Harry was in the garden, pruning roses, his small rebellion against chaos. Gardening was his therapy, his one escape from the storm. But the moment he saw Meghan's face through the glass door, he dropped his shears. He knew, instinctively. "What happened?" he asked, rushing in. She handed him the letter. Her lips pressed tight, her breath shallow. He read it once, then again, and for the first time in years, he said nothing. No defense, no denial, just silence. He sat down on the nearest chair, staring at the paper like it was a ghost. "This can't be right," he murmured. "They wouldn't not like this." But Meghan wasn't listening. She was pacing, trembling with fury. "They can't do this. They have no authority here. We're not even in the UK. Harry rubbed his temples. "It's not about jurisdiction," he said quietly. "It's about symbolism." "Symbolism?" she snapped. "They're humiliating us." Her voice rose, echoing across the marble hall. The staff froze outside the doorway. Then Meghan turned toward him. "Did you know?" Harry looked up, startled. "What? Of course not. Then why does it feel like they've been planning this for months?" He didn't answer, because deep down, he suspected she was right. The silence between them thickened, filled with the ghosts of every decision they'd made. The interviews, the memoir, the Netflix series, the endless headlines. And now, this letter was the price. Harry stood slowly, walked toward the window. He could see the distant hills, golden under the California light. A world away from the gray skies of Windsor. And yet, in that moment, he felt more trapped than ever. His father had cut him off. His brother had signed it. And his mother's memory, the one he had used to justify his choices, felt further away than ever before. He whispered, "He really did it." Meghan turned sharply. "Then we'll respond." "Respond?" "Yes," she said fiercely. "A statement. We'll call this what it is, revenge. They can't silence us." Harry shook his head. "No, Meghan. That's what they expect." She frowned. "So what? You just take it." He exhaled slowly. "It's not about taking it. It's about not making it worse." But the damage was already done. Within hours, the letter leaked. Someone, maybe a palace aide, maybe a journalist, had already tipped the press. The news spread like wildfire. Every major outlet carried the same headline. King Charles officially strips Harry and Meghan of royal status. Television anchors debated the moral fallout. Social media burned with chaos. Some praised the king for defending the crown. Others accused him of cruelty. And in the middle of it all, Harry and Meghan became ghosts of the institution they once belonged to. By evening, drones circled their mansion. Paparazzi filled the streets. The couple's silence only deepened the mystery. Was Harry angry? Broken? Regretful? No one knew. But inside the house, tension was boiling. Meghan had locked herself in her study, making frantic calls to her publicist. Harry sat alone in the living room, staring at an old photograph, him and William as boys, running through Balmoral's fields. He remembered how his father used to call them the future. Now, one was the heir, the other, an exile. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" But before guilt could swallow him, his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. He hesitated, then opened it. It was a single line. "This isn't over." Check the signature. Harry frowned. What did that mean? He grabbed the letter, scanned the bottom. The king's seal, yes. William's countersignature, yes. But beneath it, faintly embossed into the parchment, was another mark. A hidden one, almost invisible. The crest of the Privy Council. That wasn't standard protocol. It meant the decision hadn't just come from Charles and William. It had passed through the inner circle of royal advisors, some of whom wielded power even the public didn't know existed. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was coordinated, strategic. Someone inside the palace had wanted Harry gone completely. But who? Harry stared at the faint mark until the lines blurred. His head pounded. He turned to Meghan, still on the phone, and said quietly, "This isn't just about us." She stopped mid-sentence. "What are you talking about?" He handed her the letter, pointed to the mark. She squinted. Her expression shifted, from confusion to realization to horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. They planned this long before the decree. And for the first time that day, she looked scared. Not angry, not indignant, just genuinely afraid. Because if this decision had been planned in secret, what else had they prepared? That night, the couple barely spoke. The lights stayed on. The staff dismissed early. Harry sat by the fireplace, holding the letter in his hands, staring at the royal crest as though it might speak to him. Every crackle of the fire felt like a whisper of betrayal. He thought about his father, the man who once read him bedtime stories, who taught him how to shake hands with dignity, who told him once, "Our blood carries duty, son. Never forget that." And now, that same father had branded him a stranger. Meanwhile, back in London, the king couldn't sleep either. He stood at his balcony, looking out over the palace courtyard. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. But all he could see was the shadow of a boy, ginger-haired, laughing, free. He whispered to the night, "It didn't have to end like this." But perhaps, deep down, it always would have. Because a family divided by fame and pride doesn't heal, it fractures. And the cracks were widening by the hour. The next morning, as the sun rose over Montecito, Meghan woke to find another envelope on the doorstep. No seal this time. No courier. Just plain paper. Inside was a printed photograph. It showed King Charles signing the decree, William standing beside him, and someone else, someone blurred out, but unmistakably present in the room. A third witness. The person whose presence would change everything. Meghan's hands shook. She called out, "Harry, come here now." He ran in, half-dressed, alarmed. "What's wrong?" She handed him the photo. He stared at it, then looked up at her. His face turned pale, because he recognized that silhouette instantly. It was someone they both knew, someone they never thought would betray them. And if that person had been part of the decision, it meant their downfall wasn't just royal. It was personal. Harry's voice broke the silence. "It's her. Are you sure?" Meghan whispered. He nodded slowly. "I'd know that posture anywhere." Outside, the California wind picked up, scattering the ashes from the fireplace through the room. The letter slipped from the table, landing on the marble floor beside the photograph. Two symbols, two betrayals. And together, they told a story neither of them was ready to face. Because the letter may have ended their royal ties. But the photo revealed the true architect of their exile. Someone inside their own circle. And when they discovered who it was, their world would collapse all over again. Because sometimes, the sharpest betrayal doesn't come from a king. It comes from the one person you thought was still on your side. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. He'd sworn he would never betray his brother. But duty doesn't care about promises. And that was the curse Prince William carried. From the outside, he was the perfect heir, calm, responsible, measured. The public saw a man born to rule. But behind closed doors, he was torn apart by the same storm that had driven his family into chaos. Because while the world watched King Charles deliver the final blow, few knew that William's hand had quietly guided it. Not out of hatred, not even jealousy, but out of fear. The fear that his brother's choices might burn the very institution he was born to protect. It all began months before the royal decree, when William received a confidential report from a palace intelligence contact. Not MI6, not police, a shadow unit within the royal network whose only task was to monitor threats to the monarchy's reputation. The report was coded subject MH confidential. Inside were transcripts, media contracts, and recordings. early drafts of Meghan and Harry's next documentary project, titled Rebirth: The Truth Beyond the Crown. William skimmed the pages at first, but as he read, the color left his face. The project proposed to explore the emotional manipulation within royal tradition, and according to the files, several unnamed royal insiders had already been contacted to participate. But the most explosive part wasn't the premise, it was the funding. Hidden among the production details was a private investor's name, a foreign media tycoon with known political ties. Someone the royal family had been warned never to engage with due to national security concerns. William's stomach turned. If this was real, it wasn't just scandal. It was geopolitical dynamite. He called his father immediately, but Charles didn't answer. The king was in Scotland on state business, unreachable for several hours. So William did what he'd always done. He handled it himself. He summoned one of the few people he still trusted completely, Princess Anne. When she arrived, he slid the file across the table without a word, and read silently, her face expressionless. When she finished, she set it down and exhaled through her nose. "Dear God," she said softly, "if this goes public, the monarchy isn't just embarrassed, it's compromised." William nodded. "We can't let that happen." "But how?" And folded her arms. "There's only one man who can stop them now, and he's already running out of patience." She meant the king. When Charles finally returned from Scotland, William didn't wait for formalities. He went straight to his father's study, unannounced. Charles looked up, surprised. "William? What on earth?" "Read this," William interrupted, placing the file on the desk. The king flipped through the pages slowly. His expression tightened. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached the investor's name. Then he shut the file, eyes blazing. "This can't be true," he said. "I wish it weren't," William replied. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between father and son was heavy, not hostility, but shared despair. Finally, Charles said, "If this project goes forward, it will drag every generation of this family through the mud. My mother's memory, your children's future, all of it." William nodded. "Which is why I didn't wait." The king's eyes narrowed. "Didn't wait for what?" William hesitated. Then, quietly, "I've already started an internal review. Financial accounts, communication logs, everything tied to them." Charles froze. "You what?" "It's not surveillance," William said quickly. "It's preservation." The king leaned back, rubbing his face. "You went behind my back." "I went behind their backs," William shot back. "Because someone has to protect what's left of this family." That was the first spark of tension between them. Charles had spent his life trying to be both monarch and father, but William was reminding him that sometimes those roles collide. Still, as angry as he was, Charles didn't stop him, because deep down, he knew his son was right. The following weeks were a blur of secrecy and late-night meetings. William worked closely with palace auditors and lawyers, tracing every transaction linked to the Sussex ventures. What they found only deepened the crisis. Meghan's company had reportedly registered trademarks using the Sussex title in multiple countries, including ones that hadn't recognized their royal independence. That meant potential breaches of diplomatic neutrality. It wasn't illegal, but it was dangerously close. When William presented the findings to the king again, Charles's patience finally cracked. He slammed the folder shut. "They've turned the crown into a commodity." And was there that night, too. She looked between them and said, "Then it's time to remind them what the crown truly is." And that was the night the final verdict began to take shape. But even as the paperwork moved forward, William couldn't sleep. Every memory of his brother. The laughter, the shared jokes, their mother's voice telling them to look out for each other, haunted him. He would stare at old photographs and whisper to the empty room, "I'm sorry, Harry, but apology couldn't fix this. Not when the stakes were this high." Then, one afternoon, while reviewing a batch of digital correspondences between Meghan's PR team and foreign consultants, William found something that made his blood run cold. An email dated months earlier. The subject line read, "William Exposure Strategy." Attached was a proposal for a documentary subplot, one that would depict the future king as cold, controlling, and complicit in silencing his brother. A global narrative war, set to destroy his credibility before he even took the throne. That was the moment William's loyalty broke. He realized this wasn't just about family. It was about survival. He picked up the phone and called his father again. "It's time," he said simply. That call set off a chain reaction inside Buckingham. The king scheduled the emergency council and cleared her schedule. Legal teams were summoned in secret. And when the final decision was made, William's name was added to the signature line, not as brother, but as witness. He didn't hesitate. He signed it. But when the pen left the paper, his hand trembled. Because the moment ink touched parchment, he knew he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. That night, after everyone had left the council chamber, he lingered. Alone, he stared at the decree lying on the table, the royal seal gleaming under the dim light. He whispered, "Forgive me, Mom." Because he remembered her words, that family comes before institution. And yet here he was, protecting the institution by sacrificing family. The next morning, the decree was dispatched. The world would soon know the royal exile as fact. But there was one thing the public didn't see. William's personal letter, handwritten, sealed, and slipped quietly into the same envelope as the king's decree. A letter addressed only to Harry. In it, he wrote, "I never wanted this. I begged him to reconsider. But the choices we make have consequences, for all of us. I hope one day you'll understand that this wasn't revenge. It was survival." That letter never reached Harry, because by the time it arrived in Montecito, palace aides had already pulled it from the packet. Classified as unauthorized correspondence, it was stored in the royal archives. Harry would never know his brother had tried to explain. To him, it looked like betrayal, pure and simple. And when he saw William's signature under the king's decree, he didn't see duty or fear. He saw betrayal of blood. Meanwhile, back in London, William tried to move on. He threw himself into public duties, community visits, charity events, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, guilt gnawed at him. Late one evening, while returning from an engagement, he found a note slipped into his car. No address, no signature, just a single line. "You've only just begun cleaning the mess. The real storm hasn't hit yet." He stared at it, confused, then crumpled it up. But it wouldn't leave his mind, because deep down, he sensed the truth. The king's decree wasn't the end of the crisis. It was the beginning. And soon, a secret would emerge that even William didn't see coming. A revelation that would make him question everything he thought he knew about his brother's downfall. A secret file was still missing. The one piece of evidence that tied all of this together. And it was about to resurface, in the worst way possible. Because buried in those sealed palace archives was a recording that could undo the king's decision and expose who really orchestrated the entire royal purge. The only problem? Someone else had already found it, and they weren't keeping it a secret for long. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began with a whisper, a faint rumor that turned into a ripple, and then a tidal wave. Somewhere deep inside Buckingham Palace, an encrypted folder labeled Private surfaced from the digital vaults. It wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to be seen. But once it did, it changed everything. Because what that file contained would send King Charles into fury, haunt Prince William with guilt, and devastate Prince Harry in a way no scandal ever could. The file had been compiled months earlier, a mix of internal communications, private correspondence, and confidential exchanges tied to Meghan Markle's ventures. But what made it explosive wasn't its content alone. It was who sent it. According to palace insiders, the file was forwarded anonymously to a senior royal aide under the subject line, "For the king's eyes only." At first, the aide assumed it was a hoax, another attempt by tabloids to fish for palace reaction. But when he opened it, his stomach dropped. Because these weren't rumors. They were receipts, emails, contracts, meeting notes, some signed, some voice recorded, and they revealed something the royal family had feared for years. That Meghan had been building an independent global empire quietly fueled by her lingering royal identity. The document traced how she had leveraged subtle references to her former title in branding negotiations. Words like the Duchess slipped into pitch decks, publicist briefs, and partnership summaries. Legally, it was clever. Morally, it was lethal. Because even though Meghan had technically stepped away from royal duties, the crown's identity still held immense market value. King Charles saw that file late one evening, while alone in his study. He read it twice, 3 times, His hand shook as he reached for his glasses. "This can't be true," he muttered. But it was. Every timestamp, every signature had been verified, and buried at the end of the file was something even more damning, a private recording, an audio clip, titled Only Dinner, Montecito. Charles hesitated, then pressed play. It began with laughter. Harry's voice faint, Meghan's tone sharp and commanding. Then, midway through, a sentence emerged that made the king stop breathing. Meghan's voice said, clear as day, "They still think we need them. But the truth is, they'll always need us more." There was laughter in the background. And then Harry replied, softer, almost apologetic. "Meg, that's not fair." She chuckled. "Fair? Darling, fair was never part of the royal deal." Click. End of recording. Charles sat there in silence, staring at the empty screen. He could have dismissed it, could have called it manipulation. But combined with the financial documents, the brand negotiations, and the pattern of public provocations, it felt like confirmation of his worst fear, that the monarchy, for all its centuries of resilience, had been turned into a tool. He slammed the laptop shut and called for his private secretary. Within minutes, word spread through the palace. The king has heard the file. By morning, an internal security audit was underway. The goal? Trace where the leak came from. It didn't take long. The source had used an encrypted proxy routed through multiple countries. But one trace remained, a timestamp from a Wi-Fi login at Frogmore Cottage, Harry and Meghan's former residence. Someone inside the royal system, someone with access to archived communications, had pulled this file long before it reached the king's desk. The implications were terrifying. Was this a setup? A double cross? Or had someone been watching Meghan long before she knew it? Meanwhile, across the ocean in California, Meghan felt the pressure shifting. The phone calls were colder. Business partners hesitated. The press tone subtly changed from admiration to suspicion. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how bad it was. Late one night, she found Harry sitting on their patio, staring at the stars. "They're turning against us," she said. Harry didn't answer. His eyes were hollow, his expression tight. "They've always been against us, Meg," he said finally. "We left them. What did we expect?" She sat beside him, clutching her tea, trembling slightly. "But this feels different. There's something coming." And she was right. The next morning, her publicist called. His voice was tense. "Meghan, have you seen what's trending?" She hadn't. When she opened her phone, her heart stopped. Hashtags were flooding X, formerly Twitter. Hashtag the secret file. Hashtag Montecito recording. Hashtag the Duchess leak. Screenshots of alleged excerpts from the file were already circulating, a mixture of truth, speculation, and ruthless fabrication. But the damage was done. The world believed that Meghan had been secretly monetizing the royal brand while publicly denouncing it. For King Charles, this was proof. For Meghan, it was a trap. And for Harry, it was betrayal from both sides. He called his father that night. The call was short, bitter, and cold. "You could have asked me before believing this garbage," Harry said. Charles's voice was steady but broken. "I didn't want to believe it. Until I heard her voice." "Her voice? What are you talking about?" "The recording, Harry. I heard everything." Harry froze. "Recording? What recording?" Charles didn't answer. But Harry could hear it in his tone. Exhaustion, disappointment, the sound of a father who'd given up. "Father," Harry said finally, "if this is about money or titles, take them all. I never wanted them. But don't do this." Charles hesitated. "It's already done." Then the line went dead. That night, Harry smashed his phone against the wall. The glass shattered. The silence after was deafening. Meghan rushed in, terrified. "What happened?" He looked at her with eyes she didn't recognize. "He's heard something," Harry said. "Something that's convinced him we're the enemy." Meghan frowned. "What do you mean? Some file? A recording?" Her pulse quickened. "What recording?" "I don't know," he snapped. Then softer. "But he believes it's real." She sat down slowly, processing. Her mind raced. A recording. Of them. Private. That could only mean one thing. Someone in their circle had leaked it. But who? Over the next week, Meghan combed through her communications, her team, her contracts. Nothing. No sign of betrayal. Yet the media narrative grew darker by the hour. Every tabloid headline painted her as manipulative, scheming, deceitful. Even American outlets turned. Late-night hosts joked about the Duchess of Dollars. It was character assassination dressed as entertainment. And deep down, Meghan realized something chilling. The file wasn't just about what she'd done. It was about what someone wanted the world to believe she'd done. In London, palace security traced the metadata further. The file had been accessed not only from Frogmore, but also from an internal Royal Archive terminal 3 months prior. The access ID matched someone close to both brothers, a former communications advisor, a woman once trusted by both households. Her name, Clara Wainwright. She had resigned quietly months earlier, citing personal reasons. But in reality, she'd been pressured out, caught between loyalty and conscience. According to leaked internal emails, Clara had warned that an information war is coming and that the palace must prepare. Now, it appeared she had prepared for it her own way. She had made copies. She had compiled evidence. And she had waited for the right moment to release it. Some said she did it out of guilt. Others said revenge. But one thing was certain. She had chosen to expose Meghan, not destroy her. Because buried at the end of that file, the part no one in the media reported, was a handwritten note. It read, "There is more than one puppet in this game. Look higher." The king never showed that note to anyone. Not William, not Anne, not his advisors. But it haunted him. Because look higher meant one thing. The real manipulation wasn't coming from Meghan at all. Someone above her, perhaps within the royal apparatus itself, had been pulling strings. The king began to question everything. Who leaked this to him? Why now? Why just when he was about to consider reconciliation? Meanwhile, Meghan's mental state began to unravel. She couldn't sleep. Every shadow felt like a lens. Every phone call like surveillance. "I feel like they're watching me," she whispered one night. Harry took her hand. "They probably are." And he wasn't wrong. Because while the world focused on the scandal, an unseen player was moving pieces behind the scenes. Collecting more evidence, releasing it in bursts, shaping public opinion like a master puppeteer. And soon, the next leak would drop. A revelation that would make the world question not just Meghan's motives, but the entire monarchy's. Because the truth was, the secret file had a second half. A half no one had seen yet. And when it surfaced, it would expose not just who betrayed whom, but why the king had truly lost control. The stage was set. The players had been moved. And the next act would break everything the crown was trying to protect. Because when the rest of Meghan's file was revealed, the world wouldn't just turn on her. It would turn on the monarchy itself. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming that he had always thought he was free. But freedom, Harry would soon learn, can sometimes be the cruelest illusion. The world saw him as a rebel, the prince who defied the crown for love. The soldier who walked away from titles, castles, and centuries of tradition to chase happiness under the California sun. But behind the smiles and interviews, behind the Netflix deals and charity speeches, something darker was at play. He wasn't in control, not of his story, not of his image, not even of his own name. He was a prince turned brand, a man whose every word was filtered, rehearsed, packaged, and sold. And the question everyone whispered, from London to Los Angeles, was simple. Had Prince Harry become the very thing he hated most, a puppet? If so, who was pulling the strings? Let's go back. The first signs appeared just months after Megxit. Harry, freshly separated from royal duties, began appearing in sleek, curated media spots, podcasts, magazine covers, mental health documentaries. He was articulate, emotional, raw. He talked about therapy, trauma, and breaking generational pain. The world loved it. But the palace noticed something else, the language. Every speech, every phrase, sounded meticulously crafted. Not spontaneous. Not Harry. Words like "my truth," "unconscious bias," and "systemic healing" began replacing the soldier's blunt tone he was once known for. It wasn't that he couldn't speak for himself. It was that his voice had been reshaped, molded into a narrative designed to sell. And that narrative wasn't his. Because someone had realized early on that Harry's pain was powerful and profitable. A sympathetic prince. A tragic son. A victim of the monarchy's coldness. It was perfect. A global brand born from rebellion. Behind the scenes, PR executives called it the Sussex model. Emails later leaked in Meghan's secret file revealed outlines of marketing pitches referring to the Sussex story as a global empathy brand. In those very documents, Harry wasn't referred to as a man. He was the voice of inherited trauma. And Meghan? She was the translator. Together, they were the emotional and intellectual halves of a billion-dollar brand. The irony? Harry never knew about these internal labels. To him, the projects were genuine. The speeches were from the heart. He believed in what he said, and that's what made him the perfect frontman. Because nothing sells like sincerity. Behind the cameras, the strategists and producers refined everything. His pauses, his tone, even the way he smiled when mentioning his mother. Human vulnerability with royal polish, one executive wrote in an internal memo. In other words, a performance. And while Harry was being shaped into a symbol of healing, his connection to the monarchy and to his own family was being slowly erased. One insider later described it this way. They didn't just help him tell his story. They rewrote it and convinced him it was still his. But here's the most chilling part. While Harry was out front delivering heartfelt monologues about breaking cycles of pain, others were signing deals in his name. Deals that quietly tethered him to networks of influence far outside his understanding. According to the same royal security brief that exposed Meghan's secret file, at least 3 major contracts signed by their joint foundation were brokered through intermediaries with political motives. Using Harry's brand to open doors, legitimize agendas, and sway public sentiment. He was the face, the symbol, the puppet, and the master? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some insiders pointed to Meghan's business acumen, her instinct for branding, her PR background, her understanding of optics. Others whispered about a more shadowed influence, media executives, consultants, and handlers who had latched onto the couple as the perfect vessel for soft power. But one royal aide phrased it best. Harry thought he escaped the palace system. He just walked into a different one, built on money, not monarchy. And yet, it wasn't all manipulation. There were moments when the real Harry broke through. Like the day he visited a veterans rehabilitation center in California, unannounced, off camera. He spent hours listening, helping, laughing. No handlers, no rehearsed lines, just Harry. Those who saw him that day said he looked more alive than he had in years. But the moment the media learned of it, the narrative twisted again. Headlines called it a PR stunt. Others accused him of trying to rebrand his downfall. He couldn't win. Not anymore. Every act of kindness became suspicion. Every silence became guilt. And slowly, the walls closed in. At home, Meghan was growing restless. The global spotlight that had once been thrilling was turning harsh. The brand partnerships were drying up. And worse, the secret file leak had poisoned the public mood. She began to pull back, delegating more and more public duties to Harry. He didn't realize it then, but this was part of the shift. She wasn't the master either. She was retreating from the stage, leaving Harry to carry the weight of the empire they'd built together. He became the talking head of their narrative, the face of their redemption arc. But inside, he felt hollow. Night after night, he'd scroll through old photos of him and William, their childhood grins, the matching uniforms, the unbreakable bond that no longer existed. He missed his brother. He missed his father. He missed himself. And yet, pride kept him silent. Maybe this is what freedom feels like, he once told Meghan. But his voice cracked on the word freedom. Because deep down, he knew it wasn't. He wasn't free. He was trapped again. Only this time, the chains were invisible. And then came the revelation that broke him. A journalist from London reached out through a private intermediary, someone who'd once worked for the Royal Press Office. They sent Harry a message. Do you really know who's funding your projects? At first, he ignored it. Another smear attempt, he thought. But something about the tone made him uneasy. Days later, a packet arrived, unmarked, delivered to their Montecito gate. Inside were copies of internal memos from one of their foundation's partner organizations. The memos revealed a funding link to an offshore investment firm, one with silent stakeholders tied to individuals the royal family had long considered adversarial to British interests. Harry read the documents twice, his hands shaking. The foundation, the one built in his mother's name, the one he believed stood for healing and truth, was being used for influence. He confronted Meghan immediately. Did you know about this? He asked. She froze. Know about what? He slammed the papers on the table. These. The donors. The connections. Meghan's face paled. Harry, don't. He interrupted. Don't tell me you didn't know. You're the one who signs off on every deal. She tried to explain that these were intermediaries, that no one knew the full funding chain, that this was how global organizations worked. But Harry wasn't listening. For the first time, his anger wasn't at his father. It wasn't at the press. It wasn't even at the monarchy. It was at her. Because whether intentional or not, she had become the architect of his new cage. He whispered, "You told me we were building something real." "We were," she said. "We are." But the conviction in her voice no longer convinced him. That night, Harry sat alone in the garden, the same one where he'd once received the king's letter, and thought about everything he'd lost. Titles, family, trust, himself. And then he thought of the word puppet. It wasn't an insult anymore. It was a diagnosis. Because when you spend years letting others shape your story, eventually, your voice doesn't sound like yours anymore. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that hung over Windsor, over his childhood, over Diana's grave. He whispered, "Mom, what would you have done?" And though there was no answer, he already knew what she'd say. She'd tell him to wake up, to take back control, to stop letting the world use his pain as currency. The next morning, Harry made a decision. He called his old military aide, a man who had stayed loyal through every scandal. "I need information," Harry said quietly. "Everything you can find on the people behind these contracts." The aide hesitated. "That's risky, sir." "I don't care," Harry said. "They made me a puppet. I want to know who's holding the strings." Within days, the first reports came in. Coded, discreet, sent through private channels. What they revealed was worse than he imagined. Some of these silent stakeholders funding the Sussex projects had direct connections to figures with deep political motives, people who had sought influence over the royal family for years. Harry had been used, not by his wife, not entirely, but by forces that understood one thing better than anyone. A wounded prince makes a powerful weapon. Now, they had their weapon. But Harry wasn't going to stay silent anymore, because the puppet had finally seen his strings, and he was ready to cut them. But before he could act, someone else already had. Because just as he began preparing to confront his investors, a message arrived from London. It contained one sentence, and signed, anonymous, unmistakable. "You're too late. The king already knows." Harry froze. Because if that was true, if the king already knew who had been manipulating him, then the next royal move wouldn't be punishment. It would be war. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. For 70 years, he waited for a throne. For 70 years, he rehearsed patience, diplomacy, and restraint. And then, in one night, King Charles lost it all, not his crown, but his calm. Because there's only so much a father, even a king, can endure before something inside him finally breaks. It happened inside the private wing of Windsor Castle, a place the public never sees. The room was dimly lit, filled with the smell of old wood and candle wax. The same chamber where he once studied under the watchful eye of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. But that night, there was no serenity, only chaos. Stacks of files covered his desk, reports, transcripts, leaked documents, all pointing to one haunting truth. The monarchy was no longer under siege from the outside. It was being sabotaged from within. A betrayal that began with Harry's disobedience, deepened with Meghan's ambition, and culminated in something Charles couldn't even name anymore: disintegration. At first, he tried to handle it like a statesman. Meetings, reviews, late-night calls with advisors. But every report, every headline, every whisper made him feel less like a monarch and more like a man cornered by ghosts. The secret file, the recording, the foundation scandals. It wasn't just damaging, it was personal. For weeks, Charles had managed to keep his composure in public. At ribbon cuttings and banquets, he smiled. He gave speeches about unity. He carried on, as his mother once told him. Never complain, never explain. But that motto doesn't work when the betrayal comes from your own blood. Because this wasn't just a public relations nightmare. It was a father's heartbreak broadcast to the world. Late one evening, after returning from a quiet dinner with Camilla, he found a sealed envelope waiting on his desk. It was from an unnamed royal aide, someone high up, someone close enough to know the truth. Inside was a single page, a summary of newly surfaced information connecting the Sussex Foundation to questionable offshore entities. But one line stopped him cold. These partners are leveraging the prince's public persona for political gain. He read it twice. Then again. It felt like déjà vu, a painful echo of another time, another scandal. He thought of Diana, how the tabloids tore her apart, how their marriage disintegrated in front of the world, how his children had suffered under the spotlight. And now here he was again. The same circus, the same pain. But this time, it wasn't strangers exposing the crown. It was his own son. He clenched the paper in his fist until it tore. Camilla entered quietly, sensing the storm brewing. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. "Charles," she said again, "it's not your fault." He turned sharply. "Isn't it? He's my son, my blood. And look what he's done. Look what I've allowed." The outburst startled her. It startled him, too, because King Charles rarely raised his voice. But that night, restraint had left the room. He walked to the window overlooking the Windsor grounds, vast, beautiful, empty. The same gardens where Harry and William once played tag, where Diana used to push them on swings.